You ever wonder how you could turn a grift into a multi-million-dollar enterprise? How you would take a model that revolves around you basically swindling people and then build it at an industrial scale? There's actually several ways to pull this off, but most of them are gonna end with you in front of a judge and jury at some point. But there's this one trick that lets you grift to your heart's content and fuck around with donated funds for years without inevitably being convicted of some white-collar crime. Probably. It's called running a nonprofit. Now, I'm not about to go on a rant about how all charity is a scam. There's a lot of very righteous nonprofits who've impacted countless lives in positive ways. Not all nonprofits are scams. A lot of them are, though. The nonprofit industrial complex has become an increasingly hefty behemoth, eating up millions from well-meaning marks all across the world every year to produce a whole lot of nothing in return. And I can't think of a better recent example of the nonprofit industrial complex at work than Black Lives Matter. There was once a point half a decade ago where you couldn't go anywhere, whether it was in America, outside of America, even in countries that didn't even have a black population of 0.1%, where you couldn't find somebody who didn't know what Black Lives Matter was. But there's one person who's connected to Black Lives Matter's brand that's significantly harder for most people to remember. That is Patrisse Cullors. Patrisse Cullors was one of the 3 founding mothers of Black Lives Matter, and she was the leader of Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation when the movement was at its peak in 2020. She's also the main reason why the movement is a shadow of itself, embroiled in tons of controversy, infighting, lawsuits, in a federal investigation. Patrisse Cullors is the main heroine of this story, but she was once part of the Black female triumvirate, consisting of fellow non-profiteers Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi. In 2013, after George Zimmerman, the Peruvian everybody thought was white for some reason, got off for shooting Trayvon Martin, there was outrage. And like the Ebony Triforce, our trio of career activists combined their powers of doing speaking gigs, bagging book deals, and making emotional tweets to form Black Lives Matter. And from the beginning, Black Lives Matter did not operate as a traditional nonprofit. It wasn't really an organization in the beginning, more of a network filled with people that, while ideologically aligned with one another, were still operating within a decentralized structure. And the decentralization was a feature, not a bug. BLM was supposed to represent something more than a formal organization. Initially. Now this presented complications from the go because it meant anybody could technically just throw up hashtag Black Lives Matter for any cause, even if it was just about filling their own pockets. Like some pro-BLM Facebook page back in 2018 that got over 700k followers and was soliciting over 100,000 in donations under Black Lives Matter's name. It would get suspended after it turned out to be some random Australian dude, Ian Mackey, who was just grifting. Really? That Aussie was just ahead of the curve, cause he wouldn't be the last nor anywhere near the most egregious grifter to use Black Lives Matter's name for the sake of stacking some paper. The thing that would really change everything for Black Lives Matter as a movement and Patrisse Cullors' role as its leading lady was in May 2020 when George Floyd died in Minneapolis, and the rallying cry that people who took to the streets to protest and riot yelled was Black Lives Matter. The outrage that poured out as a byproduct was disproportionate, rocking not just Minneapolis or even just the Midwest, but foreign countries across the globe seeing protests. Now, a lot of people will say that this was because the injustice at what happened in Minneapolis resonated with that many people across the globe. I would say it was more due to the fact that everyone had been forced to be stuck in their homes for months because of the pandemic, had gone a little stir crazy, and opportunistically saw protesting as a conveniently righteous excuse for them to finally go outside and also raise ruckus against their local governments for not letting them touch grass. Cause come on, bruh. BLM protests, In Greece, half the Afro-Greek population is just Giannis Antetokounmpo and his family. Now, from the beginning, Black Lives Matter was seen as an integral and symbolic part of the protest. You had celebrities kneeling. You had politicians kneeling. Bro, you had white boys on their knees begging in tears just for the privilege of kissing the feet of niggas to cleanse the evil white supremacist spirit from themselves. The mayor of Minneapolis was crying like a hoe in front of George Floyd's golden casket at his funeral. Man, 2020 was a fever-ass dream year looking back. Whole country just turned into Gotham City for 6 months. It was wild. But the wildest part was how much money Black Lives Matter was raking in from donors. It wasn't just individual donations from regular people or donations from celebrities. Nah, major corporations like Amazon, Google, and Nike were pledging millions.
The Amazon founder Jeff Bezos saying he'd be happy to lose customers who oppose that company's support of Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter in 2020 would get more donations in a single year than any other black-run nonprofit in history, accumulating over $90 million. And this is where things get fun, because for anyone who wasn't a fucking toddler in 2020, you know for a fact that Black Lives Matter in Big 2026 ain't popping anywhere near as hard as it was in 2020, where it basically put the globe in a rear naked chokehold. And this isn't just because of fading trends. No, it's because Black Lives Matter themselves destroyed the reputation of their own movement. How? By doing the most stereotypical,
dumb, ignorant, retarded, worthless pieces of black
shit I've ever seen from a mainstream nonprofit. BLM's leaders, their self-enrichment schemes, financial mismanagement, and eventual disgracing of the Black Lives Matter brand came from two main issues. The first was the decentralization aspect of Black Lives Matter. Like I said, BLM was meant to be more of a rallying cry that anybody who fucked with the message could use to push their own pro-racial justice movements. But this lack of structure also meant that bad actors looking to get rich quick could use BLM to get an easy lick, starting their own chapters where they could just take the money for the cause being filling up their bank accounts and buying designer. One perfect example is an albino fella named Sir Major Page. Bro was running Black Lives Matter of Greater Atlanta, an organization completely unaffiliated with the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. He also had lost his tax-exempt status years before this. Neither of those facts stopped him from taking donor funds like he was running a proper nonprofit. But he racked up almost $500,000 in 2020 alone. And of course, he used it to ball out. He bought suits, he bought guns, he even bought a whole house while pretending any of that money was being used for charitable purposes. His kingly lifestyle off of ill-gotten wealth was very short-lived though, because he was arrested in late 2020 for wire fraud and money laundering, of which both he would be convicted. Another example of a rogue unaffiliated BLM chapter leader using the brand to grift was Monica Cannon Grant, a prominent organizer in the BLM ecosystem who founded a nonprofit called Violence in Boston in 2017. She led several protests all throughout 2020 and received tons of money in donations, which she and her husband Clark Grant were stealing, because of course they were. In March 2022, a federal grand jury indicted Monica and Clark on an 18-count indictment, including fraud and conspiracy charges. These charges would later be expanded to 27 counts in a superseding indictment the next year. The Grants has siphoned over $1 million in donations and grants intended for youth mentorship programs and a retreat for young men affected by gang violence to buy meals at fancy restaurants, cars, vacations, and of course Monica had to get her hair did and nails done with some of that money too. And she also defrauded the government for $100K in COVID-19 unemployment relief funds too by concealing her income and lying on mortgage applications about Violence in Boston's finances. Bitch was just scamming everybody. Now some of you would say, well Mikey, these were chapters that had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation at the end of the day. it's unfair to disavow the whole movement just because of a handful of unaffiliated bad eggs. See, I'd agree with that if BLM GNF didn't
pillage and plunder
money at a level that made the fraud these smaller chapters pulled look like light work. And this finally brings me to the second major issue BLM had: Patrisse Cullors herself. A brief background on Sister Patrisse. She was born in LA in 1983, the 80s and early 90s being some of the most violent years for the Bay Area. The Rodney King riots in '92 rocked LA especially hard, and that, along with some police corruption scandals, left the Los Angeles Police Department in a rough state for a couple years and made the already bad crime wave even worse. Patrisse's mixed ethnic neighborhood of whites, blacks, and Latinos was pretty dangerous, mostly due to gang violence and drugs, and she had witnessed several relatives manhandled and arrested by cops right in front of her. There was a lot in her backstory that adds up to her becoming an activist in the future. But not only did she get into activism, she's only been an activist. Patrisse Cullors has been a full-time career activist almost her entire adult life. There's no record of any traditional employment in her work history, or even any evidence that while working with all these nonprofits, she was ever responsible for personally navigating the fiduciary responsibilities of a 501c3. Now, the next interesting fact about Patrisse is that she calls herself a trained Marxist.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories.
Now, what does that mean? Because when I think of trained Marxists, I think of some Cold War Soviet spy or agitator. Well, we never get a good definition, and honestly, by the time we get through this video, it's gonna be pretty obvious that Patrisse herself isn't really sure what a trained Marxist is either. The final piece of the pie is Patrisse's standing in the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. That is, that she was the sole board member in 2020 when BLM would trend like crazy because the other two founders, Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi, had already stopped participating in day-to-day operations with BLM to work on their other projects and organizations years ago. In summer of 2020, Patrisse would go from BLM GNF's sole board member to its executive director. She was now the most influential person involved with Black Lives Matter, and the person who had the most, if not the sole control over the windfall of money BLM was being sent over the next few months. This career activist and trained Marxist who had never had a non-activist related job her entire adult life was now the gatekeeper of tens of millions of dollars. And this bitch had no idea what the fuck she was doing. Because in an interview, she said this.
First of all, number one, I actually did not know what 990s were before all of this happened.
It's confusing.
Yeah, she didn't know what an IRS Form 990 was. She's gone on to say the term is triggering and puts activists at risk. Bitch, are you serious? Like, are you playing dumb to have some sort of plausible deniability? Or are you actually dumb and despite being a career activist involved with nonprofits for most of your adult life, you've somehow never understood or learned about the required financial disclosures for all nonprofits? This was who was in charge of BLM GNF. And the writing was really on the wall for financial mismanagement from the get-go. Because did you know you can barely find anything about BLM's finances up until like 2021? That's because the movement operated under fiscal sponsors like Thousand Currents and the Tides Foundation. This means that BLM as an entity didn't need to file any independent IRS Form 990s and could just move in financial secrecy for years. So it's possible that Patrisse was telling the truth here and she didn't know that 990s were a necessity. Because technically they weren't for BLM, not until the movement giganticized overnight because of George Floyd. Regardless, the queen mother of Black Lives Matter was either a dumbass or a charlatan. Either way, anyone who was paying attention could have seen what was coming from a mile away. Patrice would tell reporters and gullible motherfuckers in early 2021 that she and BLM GNF were focused on reinvesting funds into black communities. But multiple BLM-affiliated local organizations by late 2020 and into 2021 would say they weren't seeing any of those funds. In fact, BLM GNF wasn't being all that transparent about how the foundation was being run at all. Several of these grassroots organizers and chapter leaders would band together to form the BLM 10 and start launching complaints about the lack of transparency and resources. They were basically going, hey, where's the money, Patrice? Didn't you get all that money from Apple and Nike? Where the fuck did it go? But Patrice couldn't be bothered with any of these niggas. Nah, she was busy. Not with being the executive director, though. See, Patrice was the foundation board's sole voting director and held literally 0 board meetings. So yeah, she was literally the queen of Black Lives Matter with sole discretion over tens of millions of dollars and no accountability. And how did she use that money? Well, in reports on the foundation's finances in 2022, we got to see some classic nonprofit insider economics. For one, there was security. Patrice, as a racial justice prophet with a lot of nonprofit profits, had to make sure these hateful crackers and envious Negroes didn't try to take her out. So she had to hire a top-tier security service. That just happened to be run by her brother, Paul Colors. Paul received over $840,000 for security and consulting services under his firm, Black Ties LLC, aka Colors Protection LLC, in fiscal year 2021, and then another whopping $1.6 million in fiscal year 2022. Okay, that's not really the best look, hooking your brother up with millions of dollars of donor money, but at least he was providing an actual service. At least he was doing a real job. For another guy whose pockets Patrice filled, Damon Turner, that wasn't really the case. See, Damon is Patrice's baby daddy, and she would pay him nearly $970,000 for creative and live event related services through his event company, Trap Hills LLC, in fiscal year 2023. Problem with this is that literally no work was performed by Trap Hills LLC in 2023. Instead, it was claimed the payment was for past services. But that ain't close to the end of it. Colors' family weren't the only ones in BLM GNF's inner circle getting this foundational money. There was also Shalomia Bowers, the treasurer and board secretary of the foundation. Essentially the only person in BLM GNF who got to play with all the foundation's money as much as Queen Patrice. And he paid over $2 million to a consulting firm for management services. What was the name of this consulting firm? It was Bowers Consulting. Yeah, the board secretary of the foundation was basically sending checks to himself. Now, we could say that the nonprofit was just hiring the most qualified and cost-effective providers. You know, if we were retarded. Those of us who graduated from elementary school and know what happens when you put 2 and 2 together know what was going on. BLM GNF was run by a clique who decided to spread the wealth around their little inner circle first and foremost before getting it to anybody else. This isn't fraud necessarily, but it set off a bunch of red flags for charity watchdogs. And somehow, it got worse. See, there's this thing about black grifters especially, where a lot of them aren't satisfied with the low-key clandestine white-collar type grifting. Nah, niggas have to show off. In 2022, it was revealed that back in October of 2020, BLM GNF, with donor money, had purchased a $6 million, 6,500 square foot mansion in Studio City, California. Now, BLM GNF tried to claim it was a campus for black artists in a fellowship program, but the output across the first 17 months after the campus was purchased was negligible, save for being used as a backdrop for Patrice's YouTube videos. Maybe Afro-Marxism is different, but buying a multi-million-dollar mansion with donated funds doesn't sound very Marxist-coded to me. As more news about BLM GNF's finances came out, Patrice realized that she might have grifted a little too close to the sun and had to finally step out of the spotlight and step down from her position as executive director. not even a full year after assuming the role to begin with. Now, stepping down didn't mean that she was planning on returning to a more humble lifestyle. No, she planned on keeping those 4 properties worth over $3 million she had bought while she was the executive director. These include a $510,000 home in South LA, an almost $600,000 ranch in Georgia, an over $415,000 custom home in Inglewood, and a $1.4 million compound in Topanga Canyon. Now, Patrice swears she didn't use any donor funds to buy any of this. Those 4 homes across the country worth over $3 million were bought with her own money, which she earned from her book deals and a Warner Brothers production contract, because Miss Trained Marxist turned out to be a complete hoe for any American corporation that offered her a deal. While we have no evidence to prove that Patrice didn't buy all this with her own money, the timing was still suspicious. And another strong, independent black woman who thought similar was Candace Owens. Candace, taking a break from peddling schizo theories and revelations she received in her dreams, tried to visit Patrice in 2022 at her Topanga home. That's the compound worth almost $1.5 million. That's also in a gated neighborhood that is mostly white and literally 1% black. The 1% on Topanga's census might actually just be Patrice and her family. Anyway, Candace pulled up to the Queen Mother's compound to ask for an interview in preparation for a documentary she was planning about BLM's funding and spending. But Patrice's white security guard said she wasn't accepting visitors, so Candace and her small film crew left. Despite not even interacting with Candace face to face, Patrice still took to Instagram Live in tears about how traumatized she was.
Okay, so this is insane. In real time right now, I am watching Patrice Colors do a live claiming that I went to her property and demanded to speak to her. And she's, I only way I can describe it is she sounds like she's really scared. So we went to the property and asked if there was anyone that we could speak to, very politely, by the way. We've got cameras in tow, so there's no way she can, it's all on camera. And we just said, is there anyone we can speak to? Nobody asked us to leave. The person went inside. It was just a white man that we saw outside that was providing security, which is super interesting because obviously Patrice here is anti-police. And so she's, oh my God, I think she's crying on this live, pretending that she was harassed.
This is the person who created Black Lives Matter and was given over $90 million to do jack shit with. Well, to be fair, she wasn't the only one. There was also
Shalom
Bowers, who might actually be the biggest grifter of them all in this whole story. But things were already getting rocky before that, because in early 2022, Washington State listed BLM GNF as involuntarily closed for failing to file required reports. California's Department of Justice issued delinquency notices and threatened personal files against Patrice and Shalomia, forcing the foundation to shut down its online fundraising in February 2022. And Amazon suspended it from Amazon Smiles charity platform. Still, unlike Patrice, who at least stepped down because everyone calling her a grifter and a scammer was triggering,
Shalom
didn't go anywhere. That donor money was just too addictive for him to give it up. But if he wasn't gonna give it up willingly, he was gonna have to give it up in court. Because Black Lives Matter Grassroots, a network of over 50 worldwide BLM chapters, would sue BLM GNF in September of 2022 for alleging that
Shalom
Bowers executed a hostile takeover and siphoned over $10 million to his own firm while locking chapter leaders out of any digital assets. Only 2 years after the Summer of Love, and BLM was waging a non-profit civil war over who got all that donor money. Now, the case was dismissed by a judge in June 2023 on procedural grounds, but the drama did rip open the curtain and show everybody just how greasy shit had gotten over in BLM land. And it was far from the end of its legal battles. In 2024, that shit would get absurd when BLM GNF sued its former fiscal sponsor, the Tides Foundation, for $33 million, claiming, with no sense of irony, that Tides improperly withheld donations. Tides responded by saying the money was in a collective action fund for the broader movement and not the griftastic, scandal-ridden foundation, and that transferring it would violate donor intent. The problem with this is that Tides had transferred $8.7 million to another sponsor, One Love Global, for BLM Grassroots. But One Love Global's IRS filings showed only $2.2 million in revenue, with the millions of other dollars written off as deferred revenue. Basically, millions of dollars had just disappeared from the public record of the sponsors of BLM Grassroots. You literally cannot donate any money to any Black Lives Matter institution without there being a major risk of your money just going poof before it ever got used for any of the things you might have donated for. After years of this type of bullshit, the financial shenanigans, the litigation, and the state getting involved, the feds would finally have their turn. In October of 2025, just a few months ago, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a formal criminal investigation into BLM GNF, looking to answer the question we've all been wondering, but probably already know the answer to. Did the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation defraud donors during the 2020 protests and diverted/misappropriated tens of millions of dollars for personal use? BLM GNF finally changed their tone with this new heat and started purging their leadership, finally giving Shalomia and his consulting firm the boot. Still, as of this month, the investigation is still ongoing. Rogue BLM chapter leaders are also still on grifting. Just this recent December, Black Lives Matter Oklahoma's founder, Tashella Sherry Dickerson, was indicted for diverting $3.15 million from the organization towards buying real estate, cars, vacays to the Caribbean since 2020, and faces multiple counts of wire fraud and money laundering. Just like Monica Cannon Grant and Sir Major Page, Tashella wasn't affiliated with the foundation, but at this point, does it even matter when the foundation itself is caught up in just as many scandals? Somebody, somewhere is probably using Black Lives Matter's name to scheme niggas out of their money. Black Lives Matter's fall from grace was brutal. Its assets have plummeted from the $90 million at its peak to around $28 million. Only 24% of the money that was raised in 2020 was ever distributed as grants to chapters and partner organizations. The rest has gone to operation expenses, legal fees, consultant payments, maintenance of its luxury properties, and endowments. So, is Black Lives Matter the most heinous grift the nonprofit industrial complex has produced? Oh fuck no, it's not even close. Because there are nonprofits like the Cancer Fund of America and the Reynolds Family Network that between 2008 and 2012 built donors out of over $187 million and were revealed to have donated as little as 3 cents of every dollar to cancer patients. Or the Kids Wish Network that over a decade channeled nearly $110 million to for-profit corporate solicitors and paid its founder and his consulting firms millions in fees while spending only 1 cent of every dollar on granting actual wishes for sick children. Like I said, not all nonprofits are scams. A lot of them are, though.
I'm not gonna lie, bro. Fat bitches need to shut up, bro. I'm not gonna, like, in all respect and all honesty, like, not gonna lie, it be a lot of the fat hoes talking. You fat bitches need to shut the fuck up. On God.